So what is an instance of SQL Server? Well, instances or multiple instances were first introduced in SQL Server 2000. Prior to that, if you had your media to install SQL Server, you would install SQL Server onto a server. You would have one database engine running on that server. Now, when you install SQL Server, it installs a number of different files and folders and the Relational Database Management Service, the SQL Server service. That service runs within its own security context. In 2000, Microsoft introduced the ability to install more than one instance of SQL. Now, there's a couple different reasons why you might want to install a separate instance, and let's discuss that first. So hopefully it'll help to clarify or to help you understand exactly what an instance is. So consider that we go ahead and start our own internet service provider. We have people that begin to sign up that they want to host their websites on our servers. As an incentive, we tell all of our customers that when you sign up with us, you will be given your own database. However, we will have no responsibility for that database. All of the users will be responsible for their own security, for their own administration, their own backup, their own restore. This way, we're not overwhelmed with having to support them. Now, after, let's say, a few weeks, some of the companies that have hosted with us, and let's say that we have some medical companies, we have some financial companies, they come to us and say, hey, just to let you know, we're able to see not just our database, but everyone else's database. Well, since we've given them an assignment or a role of a system administrator, we can't lock them out of the databases. They're able to see all of these different databases. Now, that's going to be obviously unacceptable for many different companies. They can't let everyone else be able to have access and see their data. In order to overcome this, we can install multiple instances. Since each instance of SQL Server runs within its own security context, that means that a system administrator within one instance is not a system administrator within another. It's installing that service over again. Now, we have two types of instances. The first type of instance is default instance. The default instance can be accessed by the IP address, the physical or virtual IP address of the server in which it's installed, or by the name, unless we've used an alias. So by simply typing in the IP address, and by default, when we call a SQL Server, the default port that will be listened on is 1433. Now let's consider that we've installed multiple instances. I have my default instance. That default instance can be reached on port 1433 based upon the physical or virtual server IP address or the name. I install a named instance, and my named instance will go by the name of the server name followed by the instance name. So server1/instance1. Now, as someone tries to access that named instance, in order to have access to the named instance, we have to have a service running that's called the SQL Server Browser Service. What the browser service does is it goes through and it grabs the request for the named instance. SQL Browser listens on port 1434. The request for the named instance comes in. SQL Browser receives the request and then lets the instance know, just so you know, please listen on this port. I'll be forwarding you these requests. Now, the SQL Server Browser is also required for different types of administrative processes. And that means if you, let's say you want to be able to access SQL Server remotely using the dedicated administrative connection, the SQL Server Browser service must be running. Now, I often get questions, and people will say, well, just to let you know, I've installed 7 different instances on my laptop, and I've never had the SQL Browser service running. I am able to access each and every instance. If you are trying to access an instance locally, you don't necessarily have to have the SQL Server Browser service running. That's because it can use shared memory. It's not going to be using TCP/IP or name pipes to access it. The protocol is different. If you're running your laptop and you try and connect to a named instance from another workstation or from another laptop, you must have the SQL Server browser service running in order to be able to connect to the named instance.